to high attempts of honor. Ford. The Duke of York arrived off Leith. While the messengers were going to and fro, and preparation was made to disembark, he and his principal friends were assembled on the deck of their vessel, regarding this strange northern coast with curiosity, wonder, and some contempt. "I see horses," cried Lord Barry. "By your lord's grace, grass grows hitherward, that is much." "I see kye," exclaimed Frion, "so we may hope for buttered sowens at least, if not beef, at the palace of feasts." "Aye," cried Sir Edward Brampton, who had come on board, "you may hope for choice cheer. I promise ye shall live well, ye that are noble. These unclad rocks and desert moors are the home of many an earl and belted knight, whose gorgeousness may vie with the cavaliers of France or Burgundy. In this it differs from England. You will not find stout franklins or fat burgesses. There are no men of Ghent, nor London aldermen. The half-naked kern tills the stony soil. Next to the palace is the hearthless hovel. Wealth and penury, if not mates, are joint masters of the land." "I have heard," said York, "that there is much paternal love and filial duty between the rich and poor in this country." "Among the northern mountains thus it is," said Brampton. "A strange and savage race, which my good Lord Barry some name Irish, dwell on the barren heights, along the impassable defiles, beside their vast stormy lakes. But the lowlander looks askance on the Highland clanship. List ye, gentlemen, all bears a different aspect here from the gentle southern kingdoms, but they are men, proud, valiant, warlike men, as such they claim our respect. His Majesty and a few others are moreover right gallant cavaliers." "Mark these words," said York earnestly, "and remember, dear friends, that we the world's wanderers seek refuge here of our own will, which if we find we must not disdain our hosts. Remember, too, the easy rage of the fiery Scot, and that we boast gentler customs. Suffer no brawling to mar our concord. Let not Richard of York, who of all his wide realm possesses your hearts only, find his dominions narrowed or violently disturbed by your petulance and pride." The Duke's associates listened with respect. Hitherto the spirited boy had been led by a Barry, a Clifford, a Neville, or a Plantagenet. They had counselled, spoken for him. His sword only had been as active as theirs. A new light seemed to have broken in upon his soul. It assumed a seriousness and power that exalted him in their eyes, while it took nothing from the candor and single-hearted reliance on their loves, which was his dearest charm. On landing, the Duke of York was escorted to Edinburgh by the Earl of Errol, Sir Patrick Hamilton, and others. The attire, arms, and horses, with their caparisons, of these gentlemen, were little inferior to those displayed at Paris. King James awaited him at the castle of Edinburgh. The monarch received his guest in state on his throne. The prince was struck at once by his elegance, his majesty, and sweet animated aspect. His black bonnet, looped up by a large ruby, sat lightly on his brow, his glossy black curly hair escaping in ringlets from underneath. His embroidered shirt collar, thrown back, displayed his throat, and the noble expression of his head, his dark gray eyes, his manly sunburnt complexion. The look of thought, combined with goodness, mingled with dignity, gave an air of distinction to his whole person. Various were the physiognomies, various the guises of those around him. The swart, gaunt Highlander, in his singular costume, the blue-eyed, red-haired Sioux of the lowlands were there, and in each and all were remarkable a martial, sometimes a ferocious, expression. The Prince of England entered, surrounded by to the Scotch, foreign-looking knights. James descended from his throne to embrace his visitant, and then reassumed it, while all eyes were turned upon the royal adventurer, whose voice and mien won every heart, before his eloquence had time to move them. "High and mighty king," said Richard, "your grace, and these your nobles present, be pleased to hear the tragedy of one, who, born a prince, comes even as a beggar to your court. My lords, Sorrow and I were not twins. I am the elder, and for 9 years I beheld not the ill visage of that latest birth of my poor but royal mother's fortunes. It were a long tale to tell, what rumour has made familiar to every ear. My uncle Gloucester's usurpation, my brother's death, and the sorrows of our race. I lost my kingdom ere I possessed it, and while yet my young hands were too feeble to grasp the sceptre of my ancestors, and with it, the sword needful to defend the same, capricious fate bestowed it on Henry of Richmond, a base-born descendant of ill-nurtured Bolingbroke, a scion of that red rose that so long and so rightfully had been uprooted in the land, which they had bought with its children's dearest blood. Good my lords, I might move you to pity did I relate how, in my tender years, that usurer king sought my life, buying the blood of the orphan at the hands of traitors. How when these cruelties failed him, he used subtler arts, giving me nicknames, meeting my gallant array of partisans, not with an army of their peers, but with a base rout of deceits, treasons, spies, and blood-stained decoyers. It would suit me better to excite your admirations by speaking of the nobleness and fidelity of my friends, the generosity of the sovereigns who have shed invaluable dews upon the fading white rose, so to refresh and restore it. But not to waste my tediousness on you, let this be the sum. I am here, the friend of France, the kinsman of Burgundy, the acknowledged lord of Ireland. Pursued by my powerful foe, I am here, King of Scotland, to claim your friendship and your aid. Here lies the accomplishment of my destiny, the universal justice to be rendered me, which I dreamed of in my childhood. The eagle hopes of my youth, my better fortunes, and future greatness have fled me. But here they have found a home. Here they are garnered up. Render them back to me, my lord. Unlock with the iron key of fatal battle the entrance to those treasures, all mine own, whose absence renders me so poor. Arm for me, Scotland, arm for the right. Never for a juster cause could you buckle breastplate or poise your lance. Be my captain, and these your peers, my fellow soldiers. Fear not but that we vanquish, that I gain a kingdom, you eternal glory from your regal gift. Alas, I am as a helmless vessel drifting towards the murderous rock, but you, as the strong north wind, may fill the flapping sails, and carry me on my way with victory and gladness. A murmur filled the presence chamber. Dark Douglas grasped his sword. Hamilton's eyes glanced lightnings. Not one there but felt his heart beat with desire to enforce the illustrious exile's right. The tide of rising enthusiasm paused as James arose, and deep attention held them all. He descended from his throne. My royal brother, he said, were I a mere errant knight, so good and high I esteem your cause, without more ado I would don my armor and betake me to the field. The same power which enables me to afford you far better succor than the strength of one arm, obliges me to pause and take counsel, ere I speak what it is in my heart to promise. But your highness has made good your interests among my counselors, and I read in their gestures the desire of war and adventure for your sake. Deem yourself an exile no more. Fancy that you have come from merry England to feast with your brother in the north, and we will escort you back to your capital in triumphant procession, showing the gaping world how slighter than silky cobwebs are the obstacles that oppose the united strength of Plantagenet and Stuart. Welcome, thrice welcome to the Scottish land. Kinsmen, nobles, valiant gentlemen, bid dear welcome to my brother England. Chapter 30. The Court of Scotland. A lady, the wonder of her kind, whose form was upborne by a lovely mind, which dilating had moulded her mien and motion, like a sea-flower, unfolded beneath the ocean. Shelley. A few days made it apparent that York acquired a stronger power over the generous and amiable King of Scotland than could be given by motives of state policy. He became his friend, no empty name with James, whose ardent soul poured itself headlong into this new channel, and reveled in a kind of ecstasy in the virtues and accomplishments of his favored guest. Both these princes were magnanimous and honorable, full of grandeur of purpose and gentleness of manner. United by these main qualities, the diversities of their dispositions served rather to draw them closer. Though Richard's adventures and disasters had been so many, his countenance, his very mind was less careworn than that of James. The White Rose, even in adversity, was the nursling of love. The Scottish prince, in his palace-fostered childhood, had been the object of his father's hatred and suspicion. Cabal, violence, and duplicity had waited on him. James governed those around him by demonstrating to them that it was their interest to obey a watchful, loving, generous monarch. Richard's power was addressed to the most exalted emotions of the human heart, to the fidelity, self-devotion, and chivalric attachment of his adherents. James drew towards himself the confidence of men. Richard bestowed his own upon them. James was winning from his courtesy, Richard from his ingenuousness. Remorse had printed a fadeless stamp of thought and pain on the king's countenance, and internal self-communion and self-rebuke were seated in the deep shadows of his thoughtful eyes. Richard's sorrow for the disasters he might be said to have occasioned his friends, his disdain of his own vagabond position, his sadness when his winged thoughts flew after the Adalid, to hover over his sweet Monina. All these emotions were tinged by respect for the virtues of those around him, conscious rectitude, pious resignation to Providence, gratitude to his friends, and a tender admiration of the Virgin. Virtues of her he loved, so that there arose thence only a softer expression for his features, a sweetness in the candor of his smile, a gentle fascination in his frank address that gave at once the stamp of elevated feeling and goodness to his mien. He looked innocent, while James's aspect gave token that in his heart good and ill had waged war. The better side had conquered, yet had not come off scathless from the fight. In the first enthusiasm of his new attachment, James was eager to lavish on his friend every mark of his favor and interest. He was obliged to check his impatience and to submit to the necessity of consulting with and deferring to others. His promises, though large, continued therefore to be vague, and York knew that he had several enemies at the council board. The intimacy between him and the king prevented him from entertaining any doubts as to the result, but he had a difficult task in communicating this spirit of patient forbearance to his friends. Sometimes they took sudden fright, lest they should all at once meet a denial to their desires. Sometimes they were indignant at the delays that were interposed. None was more open in his expressions of discontent than Master Secretary Frion, he who had been the soul of every enterprise until now, who had fancied that his talents for negotiation would be of infinite avail in the Scottish court, found that the friendship between the princes, and Richard's disdain of artfully enticing to his side his host's noble subjects, destroyed at once his diplomatic weaving. He craftily increased the discontent of the proud Neville, the disquietude of the zealous Lady Brampton, and the turbulent intolerance of repose of Lord Barry, while Richard, on the other hand, exerted himself to tranquilize and reduce them to reason. He was sanguine in his expectations, and above all, confident in his friend's sincere intention to do more than merely assist him by force of arms. He saw 1,000 projects at work in James's generous heart, every one tending to exalt him in the eyes of the world, and to rescue him forever from the nameless, fugitive position he occupied. Nor was his constant intercourse with the king of small influence over his happiness. The genius, the versatile talents, the grace and accomplishments of this sovereign, the equality and sympathy that reigned between them, was an exhaustless source of more than amusement, of interest and delight. The friends of James became his friends. Sir Patrick Hamilton was chief among these, and warmly attached to the English prince. Another, whom at first ceremony had placed at a greater distance from him, grew into an object of intense interest and continual excitation. "This evening," said the king to him, soon after his arrival, "you will see the flower of our Scottish damsels, the flower of the world well may I call her. For assuredly, when you see the Lady Catherine Gordon, you will allow that she is matchless among women." Richard was surprised. Did James's devotion to Lady Jane Kennedy, nay, his conscious look whenever he mentioned her, mean nothing? Sides on this appeal to his own judgment, he pictured his soft-eyed Spaniard with all her vivacity and all her tenderness, and he revolted from the idea of being the slave of any other beauty. "Speak to our guest, Sir Patrick," continued the king, "and describe the fair earthly angel who makes a heaven of our bleak wilds. Or rather, for his highness might suspect you, let me, not her lover, but her cousin, her admirer, her friend, tell half the charms, half the virtues of the daughter of Huntley. Is it not strange that I, who have seen her each day since childhood, and who still gaze with wonder on her beauty, should yet find that words fail me when I would paint it? I am apt to see, and ready to praise, the delicate arch of this lady's brow, the fire of another's eyes, another's pouting lip and fair complexion, the gay animation of one, the chiseled symmetry of a second. Often, when our dear Lady Kate has sat, as is often her wont, retired from sight, conversing with some travelled greybeard, or paying the homage of attention to some ancient dame, of late I have remarked her often in discourse with Lady Brampton. I have studied her face and person to discover where the overpowering charm exists, which, like a strain of impassioned music, electrifies the senses and touches the hearts of all near her. Is it in her eyes? A poet might dream of dark blue orbs like hers, and that he had kissed eyelids soft as those, when he came unawares on the repose of young Aurora, and go mad for ever after because it was only a dream. Yet I have seen brighter, nor are they languishing. Her lips, yes, the soul of beauty is there, and so is it in her dimpled chin, in the delicate rounding of her cheeks, and the swan-like loveliness of her throat, in the soft ringlets of her glossy hair, down to the very tips of her roseate-tinged fingers, there is proportion, expression, and grace. You will hardly see all this. At first you will be struck, extreme beauty must strike, but your second thought will be to wonder what struck you, and then you will look around and see 20 prettier and more attractive. And then, why, at the first words she speaks, you will fancy it an easy thing to die upon the mere thought of her. Her voice alone will take you out of yourself and carry you into another state of being. She is simple as a child, straightforward, direct. Falsehood, Catherine is truth. This simplicity, which knows neither coloring nor deviation, might almost make you fear, while you adore her, but that her goodness brings you back to love. She is good, almost beyond the consciousness of being so. She is good because she gives herself entirely up to sympathy. And beyond every other, she dives into the sources of your pleasures and pains, and takes a part in them. The better part of yourself will, when she speaks, appear to leap out, as if, for the first time, it found its other half. While the worse is mute, like a stricken dog before her, she is gay, more eager to create pleasure than to please. For to please, we must think of ourselves and be ourselves the hero of the story, and Catherine is ever forgetful of self. She is guileless and gawless. All love her. Her proud father and fiery, contentious Highland brothers defer to her. Yet to look at her, it is as if the youngest and most innocent of the Graces read a page of wisdom's book, scarce understanding what it meant, but feeling that it was right. It was dangerous to provoke the spirit of criticism by excessive praise. Richard felt half inclined to assert that there was something in the style of the king's painting that showed he should not like this lauded lady. But she was his cousin, he was proud of her, and so he was silent. There was a ball at court that night, and he would see many he had never seen before. James made it a point that he should discover which was his cousin. He could not mistake. "She is loveliness itself," burst from his lips, and from that moment he felt what James had said, that there was a music breathing from her face. An unearthly, spirit-stirring beauty that inspired awe. Had not her perfect want of pretension, her quite unassuming simplicity, at once led him back to every thought associated with the charms and virtues of woman. Lady Brampton was already a link between them, and in a few minutes, he found himself conversing with more unreserve and pleasure than he had ever done. There are two pleasures in our intercourse in society. One is to listen, another to speak. We may frequently meet agreeable, entertaining people, and even sometimes individuals, whose conversation, either by its wit, its profundity, or its variety, commands our whole rapt attention. But very seldom during the course of our lives do we meet those who thaw every lingering particle of ice, who set the warm life springs flowing, and entice us with our hearts upon our lips, to give utterance to its most secret mysteries, to disentangle every knot and fold of thought, and like seaweed in the wave, to spread the disregarded herbage, as a tracery matchlessly fair before another's eyes. Such pleasure Richard felt with Catherine, and ever and anon her melodious voice interposed with some remark, some explanation of his own feelings, at once brilliant and true. Richard knew that Sir Patrick Hamilton loved the Lady Catherine Gordon. He also was related to the royal family. Hamilton, in the eyes of all, fair ladies and sage counsellors, was acknowledged to be the most perfect knight of Scotland. What obstacle could there be to their union? Probably it was already projected, and acceded to. Richard did not derogate from the faith that he told himself he owed to Monina, by cultivating a friendship for the promised bride of another, and moreover one whom, after the interval of a few short months, he would never see again. Satisfied with this reasoning, York lost no opportunity of devoting himself to the Lady Catherine. His interests were the continual subject of discussion in the royal council chamber. There were a few who did not speak in his favor. The principal of these was the Earl of Moray, the king's uncle, the least in consideration, for he was not of the council though he influenced it. But the bitterest in feeling was Sir John Ramsay, Laird of Boming, who styled himself Lord Bothwell. He had been a favourite of James III. His dark, fierce temper was exasperated by his master's death, and he brooded perpetually for revenge. He had once, with several other nobles, entered into a conspiracy to deliver up the present king to Henry VII, and the traitorous intent was defeated, not from want of will, but want of power in his abettors. Since then, Lord Bothwell, though nominally banished and attainted, was suffered to live in Edinburgh, nay, to have access to the royal person. James, whose conscience suffered so dearly by the death of his father, had no desire to display severity towards his ancient faithful servant. Besides, one who was really so insignificant as Sir John Ramsay. This man was turbulent, dissatisfied. He was sold to Henry of England, and had long acted as a spy. The appearance of York at Edinburgh gave activity and importance to his function. His secret influence and covert intrigues retarded somewhat the projects and desires of the king. When the first opposition made to acknowledging this pretender to the English crown was set aside, other difficulties ensued. Some of the councillors were for making hard conditions with the young duke, saying that half a kingdom were gift enough to a Prince Lackland. A golden opportunity was this, they averred, to slice away a bonny county or two from wide England. He whom they gifted with the rest could hardly say them nay. But James was indignant at the base proposal, and felt mortified and vexed when obliged to concede in part, and to make conditions which he thought hard with his guest. After a noisy debate, these propositions were drawn out, and York was invited to attend the council, where they were submitted for his assent. These conditions principally consisted in the surrender of Berwick and the promised payment of 100,000 marks. They were hard, for it would touch the new monarch's honor not to dismember his kingdom, and it were his policy not to burden himself with a debt which his already oppressed subjects must be drawn on to pay. The Duke asked for a day for consideration, which was readily granted. With real zeal for his cause on one side and perfect confidence in his friend's integrity on the other, these difficulties became merely nominal, and the treaty was speedily arranged. But the month of September was near its close. A winter campaign would be of small avail. Money, arms, and trained men were wanting. The winter was to be devoted to preparation. With the spring, the Scottish army was to pass the English border. In every discussion, in every act, James acted as his guest's brother, the sharer of his risks and fortunes. One will, one desire was theirs. Sir Patrick Hamilton went into the West to raise levies. No third person interposed between them. It was the king's disposition to yield himself wholly up to the passion of the hour. He saw in Richard not only a prince deprived of his own and driven into exile, but a youth of royal lineage, exposed to the opprobrium of nicknames and the accusation of imposture. The King of France acknowledged, but he had deserted him. The Archduke had done the same. How could James prove that he would not follow in these steps? He levied the armies of his kingdom in his favor. He was to fight and conquer for him next spring. The intervening months were intolerable to the fervent spirit of the Stuart. Something speedy, something now, he longed. He resolved to do, which, with a trumpet note, should to all corners of the world declare that he upheld Richard of York's right, that he was his defender, his champion. Once he penned a universal challenge, then another especially addressed to Henry Tudor. But his invasion were a better mode than this. Should he give him rank in Scotland? That would ill beseem one who aspired to the English crown. Should he proclaim him Richard IV in Edinburgh? York strongly objected to this. Money, it were a base gilding. Besides, James was very poor, and had melted down his plate, and put his jewels to pawn, to furnish forth the intended expedition. Yet there was one way. The idea was as lightning. James felt satisfied and proud, and then devoted all his sagacity, all his influence, all his ardent soul to the accomplishment of a plan, which, while it ensured young Richard's happiness, stamped him indelibly as being no vagabond impostor, but the honored prince, the kinsman and ally of Scotland's royal house. King James and the Duke of York had ridden out to inspect a Lowland regiment, which the Earl of Angus proudly displayed as the force of the Douglas. As they returned, James was melancholy and meditative. "It is strange and hard to endure," he said at last, fixing on his companion his eyes at once so full of fire and thought. "When two spirits contend within the little microcosm of man, I felt joy at sight of those bold followers of the Douglas, to think that your enemy could not resist them. But I do myself foolish service when I place you on the English throne. You will leave us, my lord. You will learn in your bonny realm to despise our barren wilds. It will be irksome to you in prosperity to think of your friends of the dark hour." There was sincerity in these expressions, but exaggeration in the feelings that dictated them. Richard felt half embarrassed, in spite of gratitude and friendship. The king, following the bent of his own thoughts, not those of others, suddenly continued, "Our cousin Kate at last finds grace in your eyes. Is she not good and beautiful, all cold and passionless as she is?" Cold, the Lady Catherine, whose heartfelt sympathy was a sunny clime in which he basked, whose sensibility perpetually varied the bright expression of her features. York repeated the word in astonishment. "Thou findest her wax?" inquired James, smiling. "By my troth, she has proved but marble before." "I cannot guess even at your meaning," replied York, with all the warmth of a champion. "The lady is in the estimation of all, in your own account, the best daughter, the most devoted friend, the kindest mistress in the world. How can we call that spirit cold which animates her to these acts? It is not easy to perform, as she does, our simplest duties. How much of self-will, of engrossing humor, even of our innocent desires and cherished tastes, must we not sacrifice, when we devote ourselves to the pleasure and service of others? How much attention does it not require, how sleepless a feeling of interest, merely to perceive and understand the moods and wishes of those around us? An inert, sluggish nature, half ice, half rock, cannot do this. To achieve it, as methinks your fair kinswoman does, requires all her understanding, all her sweetness, all that exquisite tact and penetrative feeling I never saw but in her." "I am glad you say this," said James. "Yes, Kate has a warm heart. None has a better right to say so than I. There were times, for the gloom of the dark hour is somewhat mitigated, when no priest, no penance, had such power over me as my cousin Catherine's sweet voice. Like a witch she dived into the recesses of my heart, plucking thence my unholy distrust in God's mercy. By St. Andrew, when I look at her, all simple and gentle as she is, I wonder in what part of her resides the wisdom and the eloquence I have heard fall from her lips, nor have I had the heart to reprove her, when I have been angered to see our cousin Sir Patrick driven mad by her sugared courtesies." "Does she not affect Sir Patrick?" asked Richard, while he wondered at the thrilling sensation of fear that accompanied his words. "Yea, heartily, she will replied the king. "Would you have me disdain our kinsman? She asks when I rail, but you, who are of gender masculine though by the mass, a smooth specimen of our rough kind, know full well that pride and impertinence are better than equable, smiling, impenetrable sweetness. Did the lady of my love treat me thus, Esteth, I think I should order myself the rack for pastime. But we forget ourselves. Push on, dear prince. It is the hour when the hawks and their fair mistresses are to meet us on the hillside. I serve no such glassy damsel, nor would I that little Kennedy's eye darted fires on me in scorn of ray delay. Are not my pretty Lady Jane's eyes bright, Sir Duke, as a firefly among dark-leaved myrtles, or a dewdrop on the heather, when the morning sun glances on it, as we take our mountain morning way to the chase? You look grave, my friend. Surely her eyes are not save as nature's miracle to you." "Assuredly not," replied York. "Are they other to your majesty? You do not love the lady." "Oh no," reiterated James with a meaning glance, "I do not love the Lady Jane. Only I would bathe in fire, bask in ice, do each and every impossibility woman's caprice could frame for trials to gain. But I talk wildly to a youthful sage. Say, most revered anchorite, wherefore doubt you my love to my pretty mistress?" "Love," exclaimed Richard. His eyes grew lustrous in their own soft dew as he spoke. "Oh, what profanation is this? And this you think is love? To select a young, innocent, and beauteous girl, who, did she wed her equal, would become an honored wife and happy mother, to select her, the more entirely to deprive her of these blessings, to bar her out forever from a woman's paradise, a happy home, you who even now are in treaty for a princess bride would entice this young thing to give up her heart, her all, into your hands, who will crush it as boys a gaudy butterfly when the chase is over. Dear my lord, spare her the pain yourself, remorse. You are too good, too wise, too generous to commit this deed and not to suffer bitterly." A cloud came over James's features. The very word remorse was a sound of terror to him. He smote his right hand against his side, where dwelt his heart, in sore neighborhood to the iron of his penance. At this moment, sweeping down the near hillside, came a gallant array of ladies and courtiers. The king even lagged behind. When near, he accosted Catherine. He spoke to the Earl of Angus, to Mary Boyd, to all save the Lady Jane, who first looked disdainful, then hurt, and at last, unable to straggle with her pain, rode sorrowfully apart. James tried to see, to feel nothing. Her pride he resisted, her anger he strove to contemn, her dejection he could not endure. And when riding up to her unaware, he saw the traces of tears on her cheek, usually so sunny bright with smiles. He forgot everything save his wish to console, to mollify, to cheer her. As they returned, his hand was on her saddle-bow, his head bent down, his eyes looking into hers, and she was smiling, though less gay than usual. From that hour James less coveted the prince's society. He began a little to fear him, not the less did he love and esteem him, and more far more did he deem him worthy of the honor, the happiness he intended to bestow upon him. Chapter 31. The Marriage. She is mine own, and I as rich in having such a jewel as 20 seas, if all their sand were pearl, their water nectar, and the rocks pure gold. Shakespeare. The threads were spun, warp and woof laid on, and fate busily took up the shuttle, which was to entwine the histories of two beings, at whose birth pomp and royalty stood sponsors, whose career was marked by every circumstance that least accorded with such a nativity. 1,000 obstacles stood in the way. The king, with all his fervor, hesitated before he proposed to the Earl of Huntly to bestow his daughter, of whom he was justly proud, on a fugitive sovereign without a kingdom, almost without a name. Fortune, superstition, 10,000 of those imperceptible threads which fate uses when she weaves her most indissoluble webs, all served to bring about the apparently impossible. The Earl of Huntly was a man of a plain, straightforward, resolved ambition. His head was warm, his heart cold, his purpose one, to advance his house, and himself at the head of it, to as high a situation as the position of subject would permit. In the rebellion which occasioned the death of James III, he had vacillated, unable quite to ascertain which party would prove triumphant. And when the rebels then no more, but lieges to James IV, won the day, they looked coldly on their lukewarm partisan. Huntly grew discontented. Though still permitted to hold the baton of Earl Marshal, he saw a cloud of royal disfavor darkening his fortunes. In high indignation he joined in the nefarious plot of Buchan, Bothwell, and Sir Thomas Todd, to deliver his sovereign into the hands of Henry of England, a project afterwards abandoned. Time had softened the bitter animosities which attended James at the beginning of his reign. He extended his favor to all parties and reconciled them to each other. A wonder it was to see the Douglases, Hamiltons, Gordons, Holmes, the Murrays and Lennoxes, and 1,000 others at peace with each other and obedient to their sovereign. The Earl of Huntly, a man advanced in life, prudent, resolute, and politic, grew into favor. He was among the principal of the Scottish peers. He had sons, to whom the honors of his race would descend, and this one daughter, whom he loved as well as he could love anything, and respected from the extent of her influence and the perfect prudence of her conduct. She was his friend and counselor, the mediator between him and her brothers, the kind mistress to his vassals, a gentle but all-powerful link between him and his king, whose value he duly appreciated. Her marriage was often the subject of his meditation. Superstition was ever rife in Scotland. James III had driven all his brothers from him because he had been told to beware of one near of kin, and his death, of which his Sue was the ostensible agent, fulfilled the prophecy. Second sight in the Highlands was of more avail than the predictions of a lowland sibyl. The seer of the House of Gordon had, on the day of her birth, seen the Lady Catherine receive homage as a queen, and standing at the altar with one, on whose young brow he perceived, all dim and shadowy, the likeness of a kingly crown. True, this elevation was succeeded by disasters. He had beheld her a fugitive. He saw her stand on the brow of a cliff that overlooked the sea, while the wild clouds careered over the pale moon, alone, deserted. He saw her a prisoner. He saw her stand desolate beside the corpse of him she had wedded. The diadem was still there, dimly seen amid the disarray of his golden curls. These images haunted the Earl's imagination, and made him turn a slighting ear to Sir Patrick Hamilton and other noble suitors of his lovely child. Sometimes he thought of the king, her cousin, or one of his brothers. Flight, desolation, and death were no strange attendants on the state of the King of Scotland, and these miseries he regarded as necessary and predestined. He could not avert, and so he hardly regarded them, while his proud bosom swelled at the anticipation of the thorny diadem, which was to press the brow of a daughter of the Gordon. Lord Huntly had looked coldly on the English prince. Lord Bothwell, as he called himself, otherwise Sir John Ramsay, of Beaumains, his former accomplice, tampered with him on the part of Henry VII, to induce him to oppose warmly the reception of this feigned boy, and to negative every proposition to advance his claims. King Henry's urgent letters, and Ramsay's zeal, awakened the Earl's suspicions. A manifest impostor could hardly engender such fears, such hate. And when midnight assassination, or the poisoned bowl, were plainly hinted at by the monarch of wide England, Huntly felt assured that the enemy he so bitterly pursued was no pretender, but the rightful heir of the scepter Henry held. He did not quite refuse to join with Bothwell, especially when he heard that he was listened to by the Bishop of Moray and the Earl of Buchan. But involuntarily, he assumed a different language with regard to York, became more respectful to him, and by his demeanor crushed at once the little party who had hitherto spoken of him with contempt. The king perceived this change. It was the foundation stone of his project. "Tell me, you who are wise, my lord," said the monarch to his Earl Marshal, "how I may raise our English prince in the eyes of Scotland. We fight for him in the spring for him, we say, but few of ours echo the word. They disdain to fight for any not akin to them." "They would fight for the foul fiend," said Huntly, "whom they would be ill-pleased to call cousin, if he led them over the English border. Aye, if he took them there to foray. But the Duke of York will look on England as his own, and when the nobles of the land gather round him, it will be chauncey work to keep them and our Scots from shedding each other's blood. They would spill Duke Richard's like water, if no drop of it can be deemed Scotch. It were giving him a new father and mother, replied the Earl, to call him thus. When two even of hostile houses intermarry, our heralds pale their arms, the offspring pale their blood. But what Scottish lady would your grace bestow on him whose rank were a match for royalty? There is no princess of the Stuarts. And were there, asked James quickly, would it beseem us to bestow our sister on a King Lackland? Or would your majesty wait till he were King of England, when France, Burgundy, and Spain would compete with you? I do believe that this noble gentleman has fair right to his father's crown. He is gallant and generous, so is not King Henry. He is made to be the idol of a warlike people, such as the English, so is not his rival. Do you strike one stroke, the whole realm rises for him, and he becomes its sovereign. Then it were a pride and a glory for us, for him a tie to bind him forever, did he place his diadem on the head of a Scottish damsel. You are sanguine and speak warmly, replied the king. See you beyond your own words. To me they suggest a thought which I entertain, or not, as is your pleasure. There is but one lady in our kingdom fitting mate for him, and she is more Gordon than Stuart. Did your lordship glance at the Lady Catherine in your speech? Lord Huntly changed colour. A sudden rush of thought palsied the beatings of his heart. Was he called upon to give his child, his throne-destined daughter, to this king errant? Nay, nay, thus did fortune blindly work. Her hand would ensure to him the crown, and so fulfill to her the dark meaning of the seer. Hesitating, lost to his wonted presence of mind, Huntly could only find words to ask for a day for reflection. James wondered at this show of emotion. He could not read its full meaning. At your pleasure, my lord, he said, but if you decide against my honored, royal friend, remember that this question dies without record. You will preserve our secret. Every reflection that could most disquiet an ambitious man possessed the Earl Marshal. That his daughter should be Queen of England was beyond his hopes. That she should be the errant wife of a pretender, who passed his life in seeking ineffectual aid at foreign courts, was far beneath them. He canvassed every likelihood of York's success. Now they dwindled like summer snow on the southern mountain's side, now they strode high and triumphant over every obstacle. The clinging feeling was, destiny had decreed it, she being his wife, both would succeed and reign. There is fate in it, was his last reflection, and I will not gainsay the fulfillment. Andrew of the Shaw was the Prince of Seers, as I have good proof. Still to a monarch alone shall she give her hand, and I must make one condition.